Should have made the font a bit bigger. So I think first I'd like to really just thank David for the wonderful opening. I think every time we gather, it's important to center ourselves on the land that where we are gathering and the history that we're coming from. So thank you so much for that. I had a chance to chat with David a little bit at the Elder Circle a couple weeks ago and learn about him being the first staff member in Comox Valley for the John Howard Society of North Island. And I think it's those kinds of things that really speak to the power of this organization and the organizational culture we have, that folks want to stay connected for so long to this agency. Before getting started, I did want to take a second to acknowledge two people, and one is Wendy Richardson, and the other is Paul Barnett. Coming in here now, we've had basically two leaders of this organization for the vast majority of its existence. And I just want to say to both of you that, I stand on your shoulders as well. All these other folks who've been involved with the organization and built this organization over so many years. And that, my door is always open to you, my phone, my heart are always open to you. And I really hope that you'll all stay connected. And I look forward to all of your mentorship and guidance. Well, it has been like a very eventful first month. To be honest, I can't believe it's only been a month. It feels like it's been a lifetime. We had a fire and we had a flood. My car was totaled in an act of random vandalism. I had a last-minute showdown with Campbell River City Council, and I was attacked by a seal in the Pumpage River. Okay, attacked might be a bit of an exaggeration, but why let the facts get in the way of a good story, of course. But honestly, and I think that maybe my colleagues here are starting to think I'm cursed, and I see them kind of moving away from me as I walk down the hall, worried that maybe the ceiling is going to fall on me. But honestly, these past 4 weeks in my new role have been truly wonderful. And I'm so grateful to our board, our staff, our community, and to others who've made me so welcomed in this community and in this organization. So when I arrived in Campbell River just over a month ago for my first official day with the John Howard Society of North Island, and saw these posters around the office with my face on them, announcing that I would be doing the keynote for the AGM, I pulled Jay aside and asked what the board had in mind and would like me to talk about. And he explained in his very lawyerly way that he thought it would be a great opportunity for me to introduce myself to the community, to the membership. There's all these wonderful people who come out every year and support the organization, and they'd probably like to see who this new incoming ED from Ontario was. And so this seemed like a great idea, and I was very grateful for the opportunity. But to be honest, the thought of getting up and giving a speech about myself felt really awkward and kind of self-aggrandizing. And I'm a leader who genuinely does not believe that my role or my contributions to this organization are any greater or more impactful than any other staff member. So I thought about it, okay, just getting up and talking about myself. But then, so using a strengths-based lens for all my clinical people, I tried to think of when I actually do feel comfortable speaking about myself, my background and whatnot. And I thought, well, I normally don't like kind of getting up and just, blathering on about myself. I am really kind of an open book when I'm asked questions, when people from the community come forward and want to know about me and what I stand for. So with this in mind, I had this idea. I thought I could kind of interview myself. And if I was asking questions to myself, then I would feel fine answering these questions. And hopefully the questions that I'll be asking myself are questions that you would also maybe have of me. I had this idea. I was going to kind of have two costumes, like one of me as the interviewer, but I thought, no, that's going to be a bit over the top. So you'll just have to picture me kind of being two maybe next year. You'll have to, when I'm a bit more comfortable. So you'll have to just imagine me as being two separate people. There's me, the interviewer, and then me, the one answering the questions. So I'm going to ask 4 questions of myself, and then I'll feel much more comfortable because I'm answering questions. I'm not just. So question number one, so this is me as the interviewer. So Tyler, how in the heck does someone with a background in international relations and economics end up working for a social service agency in a small community in North Vancouver Island? Well now, this is back to me. That is an excellent question, and I will try to provide a very rapid chronology of how I ended up in front of you today. So I grew up in North Kingston, and I will try, so I grew up in North Kingston, which at least at the time had one of the highest concentrations of social housing in the country. My community and my family were steeped in poverty, problematic substance use, and mental health struggles. I experienced and I witnessed every day the economic disparities and barriers that folks faced as they tried to navigate our social systems. The marginalization and social exclusion that my community faced within what was otherwise a very affluent city. From my youngest ages, I knew that I would spend my life in some form fighting for social justice and working in solidarity with folks who are struggling. I always shy away from words like helping others or giving back, as I feel that I get as much out of the work we do as I put into it, and I feel that it is a genuine gift to get to do the kind of work that we do. So fast forward about 10 years, and I had the opportunity after high school to travel quite extensively. And as I spent time in communities, particularly in Latin America, I was struck by the levels of poverty and other social determinants of health, but also by the strength and resiliency under very difficult conditions of the communities that I had the honor of spending time with. In returning from my travels and entering university, I knew that I wanted to bring an international focus to my studies, and I became very interested in global economics. I'm a bit nerdy like that. And how our international financial system entrenched exploitative, almost apartheid-like relationships between different countries and regions of the world. I decided that I wanted to devote my studies to development economics and looking at how we could break down some of the international financial hierarchies that were leading to terrible social outcomes for populations around the world. However, as I delved further and further into my studies and into student debt, I became increasingly disillusioned with the entire sector of international development. It started to seem more and more like a big colonial project where northern countries and their development agencies would try to impose programs and paths of development on southern countries, which were almost always complete failures that would leave these countries much worse off. So this led to one of my big learnings, which I continue to carry into my work today with the John Howard Society, which is that I became convinced that solutions to problems in the countries and communities that I was studying needed to be found in these communities and could not be imposed by foreign experts and technocrats. So at this time of disillusionment, I was very lucky to come across the concept of international humanitarian assistance, which was for me the missing piece. Humanitarian assistance does not try to propose or impose solutions in the context where it is working, but simply tries to reduce suffering. In particular, I came across the International Medical Humanitarian Organization, Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders, where I worked for the next 9 years as a project coordinator, country director, and executive director. With MSF worked in situations of war, famine, and natural disasters, which took me to the Republic of Congo, South Sudan, Colombia, and Brazil. Again, the mission of MSF was not to try to solve the problems of the countries where I worked, but rather to reduce morbidity and mortality through the provision of medical services and to bear witness to the plight of populations in distress. My final placement with MSF in Brazil, I met my life partner and had 2 kids, and at a certain point we realized that while it was an incredible organization doing incredible things, MSF, at least at the time, was not the most conducive organization to raising a family. At the time, I also started to feel more and more that moving around so much and working in the higher levels of the organization, I was hungry for a sense of community and to work much more closely to frontline operations and to service seekers. So at the time, my partner and I made the decision to move our family back to Canada, and through a happy accident, I came across a position as the executive director of the John Howard Society of Kingston, which of course is the city where I grew up. I can only describe my first interactions with the John Howard Society as the beginnings of a mad love affair. I started consuming everything I could find about the organization, its history and mission, effective, just, and humane responses to crime and its causes. I've always been very motivated to work with folks who are most excluded and marginalized by our social systems and who are underserved or experience barriers accessing services within our social service sector. The more I learned, the more I realized that folks who are justice involved were one of the last groups in Canada where even left-leaning progressives could speak about them with loathing and disdain, which for me is exactly where I want to work. This period was the height of the tough on crime era, and I could see that many of the strides which had been made in our justice system and the rights of folks who were justice involved more generally were under immense threat. Joining the John Howard Society of Kingston fulfilled everything I had started to miss during my years working with Médecins Sans Frontières. We were a small staff team of just around 30 people, and my office was located right inside our supportive housing location. I had daily interactions with our clients and felt very, very connected to our staff and the challenges and struggles that they witnessed and experienced every day in their work. This led to another big learning for me, which was that as a leader, I need to be connected to clients and to frontline work. I do not have a clinical background at all, nor do I have the skills to do frontline work with clients. But I always need to find ways to engage and connect with the folks who are being impacted by the work that we do. For me, getting to work with the John Howard Society in the community where I grew up and where my family lives was an incredible gift. I was able to advocate and help craft new programs for folks living in the neighborhood where I grew up. This was truly one of the most exciting and energizing periods of my life. So part of our journey to settling back in Canada was that my partner, who was a Brazil-trained physician, needed to go through the near impossible process of becoming a doctor here. After 3 years of endless exams and a million other hoops, she got a position to redo her medical residency with McGill in Gatineau. So this happened to coincide with the retirement of the long-serving ED of the John Howard Society of Ottawa, Don Waddell, who was also a great mentor to me, and who approached me to see if I would be interested in replacing him in Ottawa. I was truly honored and humbled to spend the following 8 years as the ED of the John Howard Society of Ottawa. And while I absolutely loved my role working with John Howard Ottawa, and honestly could have stayed there with the organization for the rest of my working life, the climate was not compatible. I mean, like the weather climate, not the organizational climate, was not compatible with my partner's southern years. I had lost a lot of my own winter resilience, and we started to look at options for moving our family to a more moderate climate. So we made a couple of trips out to Vancouver Island over the past few years, and had decided that we would like to eventually relocate to the island. But likely in another few years once our kids had graduated from high school. And then in November of last year, everything changed when I happened to be scrolling through my Facebook feed, where I follow all of the John Howard societies across the country, and this announcement popped up on the John Howard North Island feed indicating that they were looking for a new executive director. To be honest, I didn't even open it at first. I made this kind of assumption that it was likely a tiny John Howard, and we weren't really thinking of making the move to the island at that point anyway. However, for some reason it stuck in the back of my mind, and I searched for the ad and opened it a few days later, and wow. I was absolutely floored by the size and scope of the John Howard that I encountered. I went on the website and read through the last 15 years of annual reports, and I can say you have the most comprehensive annual reports I've ever seen for a not-for-profit. I realized that the organization had grown by almost 75% in the past 5 years, and clearly there was some magic going on at John Howard North Island, and I definitely wanted to know more. So my partner and I spent a significant amount of time thinking through whether we could potentially orchestrate a move to the North Island a few years ahead of schedule. And after some back and forth with the board and selection committee, I flew out for an interview on Easter weekend of this year. Colleen orchestrated a couple of incognito tours of the foundries and the station, and I had a truly energizing and uplifting interview with the selection committee. I remember calling my partner after touring the foundries and saying, I have never seen a social service agency that looks like that before. After spending some time with the board, I felt a deep sense of values and mission alignment and knew that this organization and this place was where my family and I needed to be. This past 8 months has truly been a whirlwind of emotion and excitement. When my partner and I first started exploring an eventual move to the island, never in my wildest dreams did I think that I would be able to make the move and keep working with the John Howard Society, where I know that my values lie. So in a nutshell, that is how in the heck someone who studied international relations and economics ended up working for a youth justice focused social service agency on the north of Vancouver Island. So that was question number one, and I promise the rest of the answers are much shorter. You're probably thinking, my God, I'm gonna be here all afternoon. That was the really long answer. So question number two, so this is me again as the interviewer. So Tyler, tell me about your experience working for 3 different John Howards. Thank you, another great question. So in addition to the 3 John Howards that I've worked for, I've also had the opportunity to get to know the other 19 John Howards in Ontario in quite a lot of depth, as well as some of the other John Howards in different parts of the country. What I've learned is that at its essence, the John Howard Society is about mission and values and an ability to interpret those mission and values in different ways depending on the gaps, needs, and opportunities in each individual community. For instance, Kingston is Canada's prison capital with 8 federal prisons in its catchment. So the organization's work in Kingston was focused heavily on that kind of traditional John Howard work of visiting folks who were incarcerated and working with them on skill building and release planning. In addition to this, during my time at John Howard Kingston, we built and launched a new community residential facility, which was a huge gap in the Kingston area, given that many families and folks who are incarcerated move to the community to be close to their loved one. In Kingston, we also invested heavily in employment services, as this was a big gap for folks who were justice involved and other folks who were facing barriers in North Kingston. When I moved to John Howard Ottawa, we operated a number of community residential facilities, but had also developed 2 significant youth housing programs for justice-involved youth, in addition to a number of other housing and community-based programs for folks on bail, folks transitioning from forensic hospital, and many other programs. During my time at John Howard Ottawa, we ventured into many new areas, such as hate-motivated violence, street-based violence, and all of these kind of responding to new and emerging needs in the sector. We also developed, in partnership with the local large Inuit organization, the country's first Inuit-focused halfway house, which was a direct response to emerging demographics of the halfway house population in Ottawa, and the fact that there was a huge service gap for a culturally safe and responsive space for Inuit men who were reintegrating to the Ottawa community. In recent years, John Howard Ottawa has ventured further and further into the space of supportive housing as a direct response to the needs that our clients were showing up with, and the lack of organizations with the scope and capacity to develop and operate large-scale housing programs. Looking across the province of Ontario, you will see an incredible diversity in the way in which John Howard has interpreted the mission and sought to respond to the needs of their community. I've heard grumblings in my time in John Howard about something called mission drift and how the organization has gotten away from core John Howard work. Some folks think that John Howard is a little too all over the place and lacks coherence as an organization. And while I understand the spirit of some of these critiques, I have to say I really do not agree. I see the large diversity of programs, focus, scope, and so on across the country as the sign of a very agile, responsive, and ever-evolving organization. Each community is vastly different in terms of history, demographics, gaps, and needs. And the fact that JHS can look very different in Kingston, Ottawa, and North Vancouver Island based on the specific challenges and gaps in those communities, to me, is emblematic of an organization which is not stagnant, stuck, or cookie cutter in its approach. Okay, promise the answers get smaller and smaller. So question number 3. What is your detailed month-by-month plan for your first year with John Howard North Island? Great question. My answer to this question may be a little underwhelming, but the simple answer is that I do not have one. I'll tell you the same thing I told the selection committee in my interview. My mission for my first year with this agency, and to be honest, my mission and approach as a leader will always be to engage, listen, and learn. My focus will be on connecting and building relationships and understanding what is important to you as staff and to you as community members. The agency has gone through a period of very rapid growth, and I know from experience that this kind of growth puts a lot of stress on an organization. So over the coming years, we will need to create spaces for a dialogue across our organization and community as to where we want to go from here, how we can continue to evolve to bring value to our service seekers, and the ways in which we need to change and evolve as an organization to adapt to the growth we've already experienced, and so on and so forth. So my plan as the incoming ED is to endeavor to the best of my abilities to create spaces for dialogue and co-creation, where we can come together on where we want to go next as an organization. Okay, last question, question 4. So Tyler, to end off, tell me something interesting about yourself which relates to your new role with the John Howard Society of the North Island. Well, there's actually just one thing that comes to mind, which is that I am the child of 2 frontline youth workers. So during her working life, my mother worked with a program called Better Beginnings, which provided support to adolescent mothers in North Kingston. And my father was the frontline youth counselor in Kingston in the same role and at the same agency for 35 years. He worked frontline his entire career and never had any interest in becoming a manager or progressing through the ranks. So in some senses, coming to work with an agency that is primarily focused on youth clients feels like things coming full circle for me, and something that is truly in my blood. That's the end of my interview. Thank you so much.